So, when people first come to learn to meditate, we tell them that thoughts and meditation are no problem. They're just the byproduct of your stress releasing. You want that stress that's deeply impacted to come out. You don't want it to stay in there. So, it's fine to have thoughts and meditation. It means something good is happening. And that is in fact true, right? That every thought that goes in, as it's getting unwinded physiologically, it has to have some kind of mental analog to, correspond with its outward flow from the body. And that's more often going to happen through thoughts, sometimes body sensations or emotional resonance. But as we go on, as we diminish the stress that is, kind of sitting in our systems, and we train this muscle of transcendence, of stepping beyond thought to actually be in touch with that totality that is the actual core of our capital B beingness, as that transcendence muscle, if you will, gets stronger and the stress backlog gets lower, something starts to happen where we can say that we are more cosmic, more transcendental than we are stress, right? Which means that in our lives, when we experience a thought, to whatever extent we are transcendental or cosmic, then that percentage of thoughts will be cosmic. And to whatever extent we are stressed, then that percentage of thoughts will be stress. So with an eyes closed meditation, you can have something called a cognition, which is like a deep inner vision or a deep gnostic knowing, which is redundant, but a gnosis of something you should do or something about yourself or something about the world that you directly know, and that you can maybe see it or you hear it or you think it in meditation. But we always tell people in early days, 99% of your thoughts are going to be stress release, because the stress release is way higher than that transcendence amount or that cosmic level is, right? But as you start to practice regularly over time, there is going to be eventually around the 2-year mark or so, and that's a little arbitrary, but there is going to be this moment when more of you is cosmic, even if it's 51% to 49%. And so then you're going to have 51% thoughts that are cosmic and 49% thoughts that are stress release, right? So the thoughts that are cosmic are nature, our source, our God, our big self, or whatever you want to call it, coming through your your individuality or your individual mind. And everything else is just, the kind of the small self still lingering on, right? So in meditation, you can have these cognitions or these like deep inner visions. You can have them at any point, but you're more likely to experience them the longer you meditate, right? Now, an interesting question starts to happen with long-term meditation. A student came a few years ago and he said, can you have eyes open cognition? And it was such an interesting question because this student had been meditating for about 10 years or longer at that time with regularity. So we can expect that he's a fairly high level of cosmicness, if you will, and the stress backlog is not choking his system. So for him, he is probably predominantly cosmic thoughts, even with eyes open, even outside of regular meditation. And so he could have cognitions walking down the street. And so if you can have cognitions walking down the street after a certain amount of time of practice, what does that mean? That actually means that the hallmark of cosmic consciousness, that first stage of enlightenment of being completely transcendental within yourself, but yet eyes open and you can still have the ability to be in activity, we could also call that stabilized rhythm. That cosmic awareness is actually a state of persistent cognition, right? Where everything is essentially cognition, because you are not just a backlog of stress release, you are universe manifesting as Holly or as whoever else out there. And so I think that's an important distinction to remember, that in early days, most of those thoughts of meditation, just stress release. Don't worry about them, don't analyze them, take them out with the trash and let them stay there. Over time, you might start to have some kind of gnostic vision or understanding in meditation after you've been meditating for some time. And that could be a cognition with your eyes closed. And I always like to say, a cognition when you have one. There's just going to be that noetic experience of, this is something that I'm supposed to remember. And you don't even have to try to remember it, you just do. Whereas a lot of the stress release or images or psychedelic, things you see in meditation that are just stress release, you won't even remember it by the time you go to open your eyes. And then eventually, you will have cognitions not only in waking life, but you will essentially come to experience life as constant cognition, because you're not living from that small self stressed out place. You're living from a place of infinite connection to capital N nature.